Welcome to Soft Pass, hosted by John Michaels, a 30-year veteran tour manager and sound engineer for some of entertainment's most well-known touring acts. Sit down with songwriters, musicians, producers, managers, lawyers, and touring professionals. Talk about what really goes on behind the scenes, in the studios, offices, and on the road in the entertainment industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Soft Pass. John Michaels here. This month's show is special to me because I'm among my co-workers. We have no professional musicians on the show this month. This month, you're riding on the crew bus with us. I'm excited because we get to have a candid look at the backside of the business with no musicians around, and we can pull back the curtain on the great and powerful Oz and take a look at the inner workings. And I can't think of two better people to have this discussion with than my guests. And let me get to introducing them now. From his humble beginnings as a busboy, which we are definitely going to talk about, this month's guest has made the transition from musician to sound engineer to one of the industry's major concert production companies. In the 70s and 80s, my guest worked for bands like Blackfoot, Eddie Rabbitt, The Police, Def Leppard, and others, before focusing his efforts on his own production company. Starting from a garage to now owning giant buildings, a fleet of trucks, managing 100 employees, and satellite offices in Phoenix and Denver, as well as two offshoot businesses, Big Event Logistics and Clearwing Systems Integration. Clearwing Productions is a major vendor in our industry, especially here in the heartland. Since the inception of Clearwing Productions, my guest has done thousands of gigs with his company, including major tours, huge events, and all kinds of promotions, which we're going to talk about. His company provides a wide array of services, not only in the music industry, but all kinds of event production ranging from politics to professional sports. And it all came from the dream and leadership of this man. It's my honor to welcome the president and CEO of Clearwing Productions, Mr. Gregg Brunclik, to the show.
Oh my gosh, John, I don't know how to respond to that. I feel like somebody. Thanks for having me. It's always great being had.
All right. My other guest has been in the business for 25 years, and it's somewhat fitting that he's an ex-Clearwing employee. He is currently a freelance technical director with accolades under his belt from the NFL, Google, Samsung, the Olympic Games, Nissan, BMW, Coors, General Electric, and a whole list of others. He's also worked with GMR Marketing on an array of events. Most recently, he developed a mobile electric car charging system for event rental. But let's rewind to 1998 when he first started working at Clearwing Productions in Wisconsin. I remember this because it was also about the same time I started doing some gigs for Clearwing. He was a lead project manager handling all of the logistics for Milwaukee World Festival for the first couple years of his employment, I think. Handling over 1,000 shows a year there, I'm sure. He's probably one of the best logistics people I've ever had the pleasure to work with. We all knew him as Gregg's right-hand man before he left Clearwing in 2009 to pursue his freelance endeavors. Please welcome the guy who you always want on the gig, and my good friend Jamieson Filip.
Hi, John. Thanks. Appreciate it.
So let's jump right into this here. Gregg, how do you go from bussing tables to bussing subgroups? And where did you work as a busboy?
One of my first jobs was, a friend of the family got me a job as a busboy at a Holiday Inn restaurant. I was 15 and a half or something at the time. And I started, picking up everybody else's garbage. And I guess I continue to do that on some level.
Oh, so how did you go from that? Like, what drew you into doing work with bands?
In late middle school, like 8th grade, I think, my dad worked for Wisconsin Bell Telephone for his whole life. So we got transferred around the state quite a bit. He got transferred from Madison to Milwaukee when I was just about to go into 8th grade. So when we moved to Milwaukee and I started to get settled in with a new group of friends here, I met a couple of brothers that had a band. One of the brothers was a drummer. Now, I had already started playing in marching band and whatnot in school, and I was a drummer. So I wasn't really going anywhere separating the brothers, and one of them was a drummer. But they had a little basement band, and my mother had always been a piano organ player, so I knew something about keyboards. And just learning some basic chord, 4-chord progressions and whatnot, I started playing with this band as a keyboard player. that's really where I started. And we did CYO dances and, really small time stuff as a 4-piece band and just doing all cover tunes and whatnot. That's really where I got started in the business and found a passion for music.
So did you end up buying and providing all the PA gear for the band then when you were in it?
Actually, no, that was quite a few years down the road. I think that when we really got started, our first PA system was I think the brother's dad bought it or something. And it was one of those custom single 12 column padded charcoal gray, 5 inputs on the head kind of a thing, PA. And we didn't really mic into the instruments at that time. It was just vocal mics, and you didn't need much of a mic when you're playing through a dual Showman. I never really had any interest in sound at that point. I was just a musoid. Actually, I was more of a jock in high school. Moving on just a year or two, when I got into high school, I was always playing in this band on the side, but I went into sports and whatnot. So I was a football player, basketball player, and all that. But when I got to my junior year of high school, I realized the chicks were a lot more fun for the guys on stage than they were for the football players. So I quit the football team to be a musician. I was still playing in the band then and doing all that, but the band reformed a couple times late in high school, and one of the reformations, they went to be a country rock band, and they took on a pedal steel guitar player. So the pedal steel guitar player played through a Leslie, which sounded very much like a keyboard at the time. So I just started mixing the sound.
Who was the band?
Well, the very first band that I had in middle school was called The Restless Set. And then we changed the name after that to What For? F-O-U-R.
Yeah.
And then that band reformed into a couple of other iterations, but it ended up being a local country band. When we went to the country band, it was Diamond Rio.
Okay.
Not the Diamond Rio out of Nashville, but a Diamond Rio out of Milwaukee that ended up reforming again into a band called Arroyo.
I remember hearing that name.
Yep. And then the latest formation of those guys even is Plum Loco, which is still like a little band that plays around here with Paul Bast and Jason and a couple of other guys that are local hotshots. So it went through a number of iterations, but I moved from keyboards to the sound when the band reformed into a country rock thing.
How did your collection of concert production equipment start? Like usually it starts off pretty innocent, a mic here and there, and then the next thing you know, you're applying for a CDL.
Almost less than that. Yeah. One of the times when the band had reformed and I was being a sound guy, I met a guy from another band who was a guitar player, and he happened to be the fellow that owned the PA system from the other band. That band was called the Louisville Sluggers at the time. And so he owned the PA system, and because I was a pretty well-known, reasonably talented sound guy around town, he and I got together and we started doing little gigs. There used to be a thing on Milwaukee's lakefront called the Free City Music Festival, which was on Sundays, and it was, Bad Boy and Ruby Star and bands like that played down on the lakefront. And then there was, just small church festivals and whatnot that we did with, a couple of folded horns and a couple of mids aside. I had some reasonably good carpenter skills. My dad was a woodworker as a hobbyist, so I picked up, by osmosis some of his woodworking chops. And we started just building more eliminator cabinets, for our inventory as a little production company. And we just kind of built 2, then 4, then 6, whenever we had a couple extra $100 and we could afford some plywood, we'd go out and build a box. So that's how it started to grow.
Let's talk about the LRCs.
Okay.
Did you build those boxes?
Well, yeah, the LRC was pretty far down the road. This partner, his name was Chris. Chris and I had been building PA, and like I said, 2 boxes, then 4, then 6. And we were building road cases as well, because that was just another form of carpentry. And we were doing all of this out of my dad's basement or my dad's garage or Chris's garage. We started to get a little older at that point, and I think he was married maybe even, but so we were building folded horns and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we got called one night to do a show at the Performing Arts Center. Now it's called the Marcus Performing Arts Center downtown. And there was a guy coming through town that didn't have PA, and we had enough to do that room. And this was in about 1978, I'm going to guess, or 79. We took our trailer down there and stacked our crap up. And I mean crap, because at the time it was crap, up on the wings. And we did the sound that night for this guy named Eddie Rabbitt. Eddie Rabbitt at the time had 2 hits that were climbing the charts quickly. I Love a Rainy Night and Driving My Life Away were the 2 songs that ended up being in the top 10 at the same time, I think. So he was really hitting it at a point where, he wanted to pick up production. He said, "Hey, you guys did a really good job tonight. Can you be in Norman, Oklahoma in 3 days?" And we said, "Well, sure." So, so we rented a truck and, drove to Norman, Oklahoma and did another gig and then another and then another and ended up touring with Eddie Rabbitt for 5 years.
So the company literally started trial by fire.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, it was just the right place at the right time, too, for the Eddie Rabbitt thing. At one stage in the Eddie Rabbitt years, he was going to put together a co-headline tour with Kenny Rogers. They wanted a bigger, different, more state-of-the-art PA than we had. So my dad went to the bank and co-signed for a loan for us. And this, at the time, it was called Clearwing Audio. In fact, it was called Clearwing Audio and Trunk Company because we built road cases. We called them trunks at the time. So my dad went out and co-signed for a loan, and we partnered up with a couple of other people. One of them was a guy named Dave Lund, and he worked for a company out of Minneapolis called MTS. And they actually specialized in movie theater installations. And they did some big arena or stadium stuff, but primarily their specialty was movie theaters. They were a JBL dealer out of Minneapolis. Dave Lund engaged a guy named Mark Gander from JBL, who at the time was just a design engineer. He's gone on to become a VP of the universe or something with them. Mark Gander and Dave Lund and MTS and Clearwing put together this box that was similar to an S4. And it was 2 18s, 2 12s, a 24-45 driver, and 2 bullets in one box. It was S4-esque, but it was rectangular, so it wasn't as square as an S4 was. And it was called an LRC, which stood for Lansing, Mark Gander's investment, Royal, which was MTS Royal Systems, Dave Lund's, and Clearwing. So it was an LRC, Lansing Royal Clearwing hybrid concoction. And that started out the Eddie Rabbitt, Kenny Rogers tour, which unfortunately only lasted about 6 weeks. And then I had this giant PA system that we had to put to work. We built 16 of those boxes initially. And I think we put the whole speaker and amplification package together at the time for about $75,000, which
wow,
in today's
that's like 5 boxes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But we built all the boxes ourselves out of 13-ply Baltic birch, and the design came from Mark at JBL, so the porting was right. It was actually a pretty righteous system at the time. So we did a bunch of Eddie Rabbitt dates with that. And then when that fell apart, when the Eddie Rabbitt, Kenny Rogers thing fell apart, we continued to do some Rabbitt dates with it and then pick up whatever else we could just to, pay the banknotes back. That's kind of how we went from, just a small garage company to somebody that was legitimately putting up a relevant cabinet.
When did the company take on the Milwaukee World Festival as a client? Like, when did the Summerfest thing start?
Well, we really eased into that. I mean, that started with one little puppet show stage probably in the first year, and then we picked up another stage because when Summerfest began, there was all kinds of folks doing it. There was a company in Milwaukee called Metro Sound that was owned by, oh boy, I forget his last name, but his first name was Jürgen. He was a German guy, and he had a big folded Horton system that did the first few years of Summerfest when it was just a stage or 2. But then as it grew, at some point in time, it ended up gravitating over to DB Sound and Upstaging were the primary vendors. And then as they started to take over just the biggest of the big stages, Clearwing was given an opportunity to come in on the small end doing the scraps. That's where we started. But as time went on and those guys got bigger with other stuff that demanded their attention in the summer touring season, and they were less and less capable of doing Summerfest as well. We started to pick up bigger and bigger parts of it. And over time, it ended up that we do the whole grounds now. Unless an act is coming in, with some touring stuff, we're the supplier for the whole grounds.
Well, I remember the company was growing at that time period where DB and Upstaging were kind of not doing as much. I remember the company it was a Martin company. Yep. I remember a lot of F2. I remember stacking a lot of F2.
Yeah. As the LRC, because again, The only company even today that really gets away with building a proprietary box is Clair Brothers, because they're just so well known and their expertise has been proven over time. But back in the day, there were so many guys that had proprietary boxes, and of course, there was no constant at all to a proprietary box. I mean,
JBL was one of the only constants back in the day, right?
yeah, right. They're probably their first one. I mean, might have been that little line array that some of the folks had around town. I don't remember a big JBL box.
The Cabaret series?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about a one-box proprietary kind of thing. And there were so many people building boxes at the time that didn't matter if it was loaded with TAD or JBL or whatever. It all came down to the construction of the box. And then on top of that, there were guys that were using 18-gauge lamp cord for wire. There were guys that were using 12-gauge real wire. And then there were guys that were, underpowering the speakers by 50%. So there were so many variables in it that the consistency of an act getting something coherent date to date was just all over the map until, I want to say, maybe the first one I remember really taking off, other than an S4, of course, was EAW, like a KF850, where they started to come out with a plug-and-play system where you bought the package. And F2 was of that same ilk.
Right.
We bought into F2 at the time because we really liked the rack configurable element of it. And they sold me on the fact that because it was a module in a rack mountable speaker box, that as time evolved, you'd just be able to switch out the modules and you wouldn't have to buy a whole new box. We were an F2 company. There was another company in Colorado called Jacobs Audio that was an F2 company. And of course, then there was Delicate, who was always a Martin company because they were evolved out of the Supertramp camp. So when we were doing Summerfest and needed more F2 than we owned, we went to Jacobs Audio or Delicate and sub-rented stuff, and that's where all the F2 came to town from.
Now you're an L-Acoustics company.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? Were you just so sold on the packaging of the L-Acoustics?
Yeah. Well, and the L-Acoustics thing is a kind of a funny story as well, oddly enough, because one of our guys, Tom Martinez, who's now the systems tech for the Steve Miller Band, was out he might have been doing...
It was Rod Stewart.
Well, that's where he saw it, but I think he was doing some Natalie Cole dates, if I remember right.
Oh, yeah.
But he went into Foxwoods, and Foxwoods had installed one of the first VDOS systems. And Tom came back and said, man, I heard something you just got to hear. I hadn't even heard it or seen it or anything, but I really worshiped Tom's opinions at the time.
Yeah, Tom's great.
He's a consummate professional, no question. He came back with such a strong impression of this box that I had to check it out. So I called Jeffrey Cox, who was running L-Acoustics US at the time, and I said, I'm really interested in looking at some VDOS boxes. And he said, well, wait a minute here. This really took me aback. He said, we're going to have to do some diligence and find out if Clearwing is the kind of company that we want to represent our products. And I thought, now, wait a second. I have a checkbook, because everything before that was just you call somebody up and you order what you want and they send it and you send a check. And these were the first guys that wanted to pre-qualify a vendor as reputable enough, for lack of a better term, to put their product up and deploy it. As much as that kind of set me back on my heels in some ways, it was kind of a new trend in what became, the world we live in today. And I really respect it in hindsight, because they saw the difference between the guys that were using 18-gauge lamp cable and, this and that, and what a real sound system as a package should be and should sound like. And if there were going to be a lot of regional companies that were putting up rigs that wanted to have any consistency to them at all, they had to be sold with parameters that you had to meet, or there would be no consistency, right? Everybody just did whatever they wanted. That was part of it. And then I went back to Martin at the time, and Martin was just evolving from the F2 box to the W8. Yep. And I said, okay, you guys sold me on this Martin F2 rack system years ago. What's it going to cost me to refit all my F2 racks with W8 modules? And they said, we're abandoning the F2 format, and the W8 box is a trap box. The W8 module will not work in an F2 rack. And I said, oh, wait a second. I bought the F2, and I'm not slagging F2 or W8. Martin makes great products, don't get me wrong. But it was one of those political forks in the road.
Well, you're like, hang on a minute here. I bought the box on this premise. And
Right.
now you're telling me that, yeah, it's not there anymore.
Exactly. It would happen to be very timely with the introduction of the VDOS cabinet and the whole evolution into line array, which of course we know has taken over the universe.
I was a little floored when I was told I had to go to Las Vegas to do VDOS training.
Yeah.
And at a specific, it was only a couple places you could go. Vegas was one. I think you guys were one place.
Yep.
Quality control to the umpteenth level.
Yeah, we were a pretty early adopter, but even then there was still an external crossover that gave you options so there were some variables in the VDOS box even that provided a lack of complete and total consistency from system to system. I think we powered, Jamieson, do you remember, did we power our VDOS with Crown
5000s at first? If I remember right, I think that whole thing came out of them trying to figure out how to get into the American market. They were already starting to show up in Europe.
Oh, they were big in Europe. Yeah.
The lab groupings weren't in the mix from the beginning. That was an adopted thing.
Oh yeah, way down the road.
I think it was Camco was in the mix first, and they were pushing that in Europe, and that was their model in Europe. You buy the cable, you buy the this, you buy the that, and Jeffrey Cox said people aren't going to buy this box unless we put an NL8 on it because everyone has NL8. That's how they kind of first started, and that was when the boxes were being made by R&R at first too, and they were black instead of the color that they were in Europe at the time. That although there was some inconsistency between the U.S. and Europe, the look and amplification, that was the way that they got their foothold in North America.
When you first could buy VDOS, you could power it with Crown or QSC or something else. I think there was a third option. But as you'd guess, that and then allowing the buyer to purchase all their own interconnect led to lack of consistency VDOS to VDOS systems that they've since stamped out in a big way. And I think, although it was a thing that kind of put my nose out of joint at first, what do you mean I have to buy your wire? What do you mean I have to buy, in the end, I really see what their philosophy was, and I appreciate it because it has brought a whole new evolution to what we're doing for sound systems today.
When you got the first VDOS boxes in from L Acoustics, how long was it before you and Martinez had that thing ripped open to see what was in it?
I don't remember ripping it open at all. It's funny because even though I started out as a sound guy, and when a lot of this technology started to come along and the business started to grow and started to have multiple employees, I had to gravitate away from being as arms deep into the technology because I was running a business and, covering payroll and watching the books and all that other stuff. So Martinez and Jamieson and some of the boys out back might have gutted those things a time or two. And there were a few people, I think, that tried to knock those things off somehow. But what was the processor, Jamieson? Did they have a proprietary processor at the time? I don't remember.
No, it was an XTA is what they started with.
Okay.
Oh, the audio core?
But it was their presets and all that. I think it was their card or a comb card or something.
It was like a PCM CIA P2 kind of card to load the stuff into it. But the comb cards was their next step in kind of controlling the process. They came up with a whole system for configuring the amp racks so that you could use DV-DOS with it or whatever it was. And it was that card that was like a D-sub connector on it. You plugged it into the front and it reconfigured the inputs to the amplifiers in the back of the rack accordingly so that everything worked right. But they still weren't in control front to back on it. You still had to provide the amplifiers, and something could still end up like polarity reversed or something like that. So we struggled with that for a while too with those.
Well, and even back then there was still the pin 2, pin 3 hot thing where some people did it one way and some people did another. But to the point that Jamieson and I are making here, opening up a VDOS box and looking at the construction of the box was like a third of the science at the time. It was still all the processing and the stuff that you couldn't see that they had control of that made it something that you couldn't really knock off yourself if you wanted to.
I don't know if it was so much about knocking it off. For me, it was trying to understand it. When I went into class and I first saw the plug, the horn plug, the whole thing made a lot more sense to me as to how it worked.
Oh, the waveguide, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the original patent piece. That was the real differentiator that L Acoustics came up with that was a lockdown patent for the first 10 years of that production.
Because if you know anything about frequencies, how do they set it up so that they all come out of the front of the box at the same time when they're all different wavelengths?
Yep.
That was the whole curiosity with me. But since Jamieson's been popping in, why don't we talk a little bit about Summerfest? Because I was just commenting to Jamieson on the phone the other day that the hardest work we do is the work that no one sees. For people who aren't familiar, Summerfest in Milwaukee is the world's largest music festival. The Summerfest part of it is only one small part of the whole summer of events that happens there. So they have something like 12 stages and a number of other production needs in addition. Like Gregg said, Clearwing Productions handles the whole festival grounds. And when Jamieson came over from his company in Madison to Clearwing, Summerfest was already a client. So Jamieson, can you just talk about, and Gregg too, about some of the difficulties of doing a festival of that size? And the festival's constantly growing, the company's growing, changes are happening, stages are getting rebuilt, things are in a constant shift. What kind of things do you do to accommodate for that stuff, and what other hilarity is ensued from it?
The first thing I think is, like what you do to prepare for it. And I think the interesting thing about it was that we were there so much. Just to give a scope of how many things happen there. Summerfest is 11 days, right? There's 6 stages that are real stages. You can fit somewhere between 7,500 and 15,000, I think, is the max they count it at the Miller stage.
When we say there's 12 stages, it's not like a 20-foot stage in a parking lot. These are huge built structures with, right. And they run between 4 and 7 major artists on them, like a headline artist on each stage. So just to give an idea.
Every night.
Yeah, and it's important to mention, just real quick, that Summerfest is one of the real exceptions to festivals in our country because it might not have the notoriety that a Coachella or Bonnaroo or something maybe has. The biggest difference for Summerfest is that everything there is hard, real infrastructure, meaning there's no feeder cable running across the ground. All the stages have real rigging. You can drive past Summerfest right now in the middle of January and all those stages are sitting there. And they all have real disconnects backstage and the whole bit. So it's kind of a whole different animal than most of the summer festivals that happen.
It's like 12 venues in one park, kind of.
Exactly.
Thing. Yeah.
And there's the amphitheater as well, which they also have a headliner there too every night, right?
What is that, 20,000, 27,000 or something?
26 or 27, right, Gregg?
It was 22 before they did last year was a phase 1 redevelopment, and this year is they're finishing up phase 2, which adds all kinds of VIP stuff on the sides and hospitality suites and, creature comfort amenities that weren't there before. But as far as just actual seating goes, it's always been somewhere between 22 and 24,000, depending on how asshole to elbow they cram them in there.
Right.
So you're talking 250,000 people on a festival grounds.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, easy. And I think their record night maybe pushes 1 million people.
Yeah.
You guys provide the audio for all of it. Jamieson, how do you even go about, how many months out do you start planning it?
We had always, back then, now I think it's a different animal, but back then, it was something we looked at early on. We'd start roughing out what gear was going to go where as early as April. Started kind of grappling with that and what we might be able to do on either side of it. The place I was going with it was kind of what Gregg had said about it being, a lot of it being permanent infrastructure, but it hasn't always been that way. There's 2 stages that in the last 20, 25 years that weren't really there the entire time. There's the north end stage that was a temporary structure. It was put up at the beginning of the season and taken down at the end of the season. And then that moved down to the south end, and then that became another permanent stage. It's a kind of a smaller amphitheater. The other thing I was going to say about it is that the scope of events that happen there aren't just those 11 days. There's a festival there almost every weekend from beginning of June until mid-September, except for maybe 2 weekends. Some of are more complicated than Summerfest, or at the time were more complicated than Summerfest. Take Irish Fest, for example. It's like one of the biggest Irish festivals in North America.
I think it is. I think it is the biggest Irish festival. Yeah.
It's like that one in Kansas City or something are the 2 big ones.
Yep.
They've got like every square foot where you could put a little stage, there's a stage. Even it's the size of a postage stamp. There's 2 mics and a speaker there or something. So from a logistical standpoint, Summerfest was kind of easy because it was big chunks, right? It's like put a lot of gear here, put a lot of gear there, put a lot of gear there. We also had to grapple with backline because backline was a whole different deal because a lot of bands rent backline there, or the festival rents backline for them, whichever it is. Some of those other festivals actually are bigger logistical challenges than Summerfest because of that. And on top of it, you're still dealing with a smaller festival with not as big of resources. You're always fighting I need labor, or I need this, and you're not always winning that fight, or you're finding the compromise that gets everything loaded in.
Touching on Irish Fest real quick, there's another real interesting element about that is the diversity of what they present. So, I mean, Summerfest is pretty much a rock show, right? But Irish Fest, they have a harp tent and they have a drama tent where they put on theatrical presentations. So you're dealing with 20 wireless mics and boundary mics all the way across the lip and all kinds of other things that wouldn't be a normal festival element. It's lots of different things to do.
All that stuff, and yet no Guinness at all at Irish Fest.
Travis.
Let me ask you this. Even though Summerfest is a union gig, the problem with having one of the most successful audio companies in the city is that don't a lot of the union people also become your employees and vice versa? How taxing does it become during the summertime with having to have all of that gear out for 3 months or 4 months and having a lot of your personnel taken up in the summer? Does it really hit it hard on the touring side and the other side of the business?
Yes. Jamieson was just touching on the logistics, figuring out about Summerfest and what gear has to be where. But then you got to think about the summer touring season peaking at the same time and all the other things that are going on. This year, for example, we've got the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee the week after Summerfest. That happens to be a dark week between Summerfest and Festa Italiana here. The logistics of getting gear and people where they got to be on time and getting it in and getting it teched and getting it scanned in and out and all that stuff it's huge. HUGE.
Do you remember when the All-Star game was in Milwaukee?
Oh, yeah.
It was the same deal. It was the week after Summerfest. And
Yep.
we loaded entirety of Summerfest out the last night of Summerfest. The last thing I did before I left the Summerfest grounds on Monday morning, I chucked a chunk of 50-foot 2-aught feeder in the back of the golf cart and drove it up the sidewalk
to the other gig.
to the other gig, up to the art museum at like 7 in the morning, dropped that off, went back, got in a straight truck, drove to the shop, and unloaded till 10:30 in the morning when I was falling asleep standing up, and went home.
Yep. Sometimes you just do what you got to do, right?
Yep, exactly.
Also, guys, I think that back in those days, it was a different era. Like, I try to explain this to people nowadays, kids who are 20 years old working in the business. And this is where we can go back and have a little fun. Back in the 80s, even into the 90s, and somewhat a little bit in 2000s, before the industry just got completely politically correct, you can't do the kind of little pranks and fun things that you could do back in the day. It's a different world. We used to have to get 16 crew hands and stack a PA, 15 feet in the air sometimes, ground stacking it or flying it took a hell of a lot more time than it did. It was just a different world. But a lot of what we did, because they were long days, and sometimes when you're on a tour, you're with the same people all the time. So we would have fun with each other. And Gregg, I got to ask you, there's a story about a prank which was so legendary, it gave one employee a moniker for life. I'd just like to get the story from the horse's mouth here today. Can you just tell us a little bit about the short sheet story?
Oh, so this is leading up to the hog leg, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as you're touching on here, when you're out on tours and you're doing gigs together, there is a family bond created in our industry that doesn't really exist kind of anywhere else. I mean, you're doing all day with somebody and then you're either sharing a room with them at night or you're, sleeping on the floor of the truck back in those days, getting from gig to gig. And even when I was a full-on touring guy, that, in the early 80s, the touring was much more Neanderthal than it is now. We didn't have a satellite tracking, constant Wi-Fi. In fact, the Wu-Tang Clan didn't exist back then. So it was a whole different world, to be honest with you. There was a lot of stuff that went on that was just either pranky or just trying to kill the hours on the bus or whatever. And So we were doing a gig in Cleveland, Ohio, and this happened. This wasn't a tour. This was the National Association of Campus Activities annual, their big show. What do they call it, Jamieson? The National. We were staying up there, and there was an employee that was on our roster at the time, and he just decided to mess with the man. Maybe we were sharing rooms. I don't even remember. I don't think so, but somehow he got into my room and short-sheeted the bed. And you know what that is. You crawl in bed and you go to stretch your legs out, and it's been a hard day at work, and he's made the bed in such a way that you can only get into like the fetal position, and then you can't stretch your legs out, So the bed's been short-sheeted. So I found out who the guy was, and I declared game on, and which is a term feared among the Clearwing ranks, by the way. Game on with Gregg.
Game on.
Didn't you give him an out, though? Didn't you ask him, are you sure you want this?
I think I may have, yeah. And he said, no, bring it on or something. I don't remember. He was feeling, high and mighty at the time. So anyways, he was one of the techs on the stage, and I was either the production manager or I was just there as the client rep or something. I had a lot more free time on my hands than he did being involved in the show. So it started out with just little pranky stuff. Like I went to his room and took all the light bulbs out and then took the phone away so he couldn't call the front desk. He had to walk down. And then he retaliated with something to me. I don't even remember what it was. And then I retaliated to him by I went to the store and bought a pig's hoof, because some people eat that shit, So I bought a little styrofoam pan of a pig's hoof, and I put this pig's hoof under his pillow so that when he went into his room at night and crawled in for a good night's sleep, when he reached his hand under the pillow, there was this cold, clammy hog leg under his pillow. He went in and kind of freaked out on that at the time and brought it down the next morning. And I don't even remember it because, like I said, he was bolted to the stage. So he didn't have a lot of time to get at me. But boy,
right.
I unleashed the fury of hell on him. So there was first the pig's hoof. And then he was about to do a drive from that show from Cleveland to Las Vegas. So I put a piece of raw fish in his work trunk, figuring that by the time he got to Las Vegas, it would smell pretty good. So that was step 2. And then when he got in the truck to drive away, we had stuck the hog leg in the front grill of the truck. So like you see a car with the bull horns on the front. Well, this was a truck with a pig's hoof sticking out the front of the truck. And then he got in the truck to drive away, and I had put black shoe polish all on the steering wheel of the truck. So he got in and grabbed the steering wheel, and his hands all got black shoe polish. And he caught me on the last one. I had bought a styrofoam pan of raw liver, bloody raw liver. And I put it up above the visor of the truck so that when the sun got in his eyes and he flipped the visor down, the raw bloody liver would all fall in his lap. He caught that one. But by the time he had shoe polish all over his hands, and he was just like, "Uncle, I like you, Uncle." So that's the progression of the hog leg story, which started out with getting my bed short-sheeted.
And to this day, that particular person is known in our industry as Hog Leg.
Hog Leg, yeah, that's his nickname. Yeah. But those kinds of times, that's the stuff that we as the touring brotherhood have to remember, that just, there's no other business I can think of where those kinds of things stick with you. I mean, what are other guys going to say? Brian, you remember that stock trade we did in 82?
Right. Yeah.
It's not the same thing.
What did you do at Summerfest to keep yourself busy for 11 days besides ride around in a golf cart?
I had my hands pretty full there, so there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of downtime. But a lot of the time, it was there's a lot of people there that work at Summerfest. You see them once a year, stage managers and that kind of thing. So a lot of the time, it was catching up with those guys to see what they've been up to and whatever it is. We really didn't get too crazy, except maybe early on when I first started, they had beer backstage at each of the stages, and it was pretty much.
Oh yeah, the free beer tap.
Yeah, it was the Pabst Miller and Old Style stage at the beginning, so they were all touting their wares. Yeah, unlimited tappers, baby.
98-ish, a lot more of the stages were permanent, so it was all pretty much Miller. A lot of the time, sit and have a beer waiting for all the traffic to die down, that kind of thing. Some hilarity ensued later on after hours. Eventually that stopped. Had to do with someone having indulging a little too much one night and not being of age.
Oh, wait a minute. Is this the cherry, the Brian Miller's vodka cherries that spurred that?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yep.
Well, we won't talk about that.
Yeah, we won't talk about that. That was kind of the end of the beer backstage.
Right.
Pretty much ended like immediately after that.
But we've seen some other crazy shit. Like there was the year that Los Lobos stole the golf cart and took it on a freaking joyride across the grounds and crashed it into something. And when Justin Bieber was just coming through the ranks, this was when Segways first came out. And Justin Bieber was riding his Segway backstage and didn't know how to control it and crashed into a whole stack of merch boxes. I was kind of laying all sprawled out backstage on merch boxes, and the stagehands were all laughing at him. Well, now, of course, he's, Justin Bieber, but then he was just some crazy 14-year-old kid that didn't know how to control the Segway. Backstage, man, you see some crazy shit. I get a kick out of people that want a backstage pass because I go, what do you want to do? Look at the trucks and the loading dock? Because there's really nothing.
Right.
During the show, especially, there's nothing going on back there.
No, it's all work.
Yeah. At the same time, being behind the scenes and catching a glimpse of some of the rarities that happen is a pretty special privilege in life, for sure.
Pretty much that's what the show is all about when I have the musicians on, is some of those encounters that they've dealt with. But we never get to talk about, production stuff on the show. So I'm happy you guys came on. I want to go back to 96. I think it was 1996 when you guys went to the North Pole.
Yeah.
Greg, could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I saw on Clearwing's Facebook page there was something posted recently about it.
Yeah, Jamieson, you weren't on that trip, were you?
No, that was before. That was a couple of years before I started.
On the sound side, that was me and Martinez, and I think John Shobo, somebody else on the lighting side. We got engaged by GMR Marketing, who is, of course, huge experiential marketing company, and they happen to be located here in Milwaukee, so we have a good relationship. But this was a project for Molson Beer at the time, and it was called A Hot Time in a Cold Place. It was a bunch of radio contest winners for Molson Canada that they flew out to some remote place and they boarded a converted Russian icebreaker that was now some form of Arctic cruise ship.
Jeez.
And, they went out for a couple of days on the Arctic Ocean and moored up to an iceberg and played frisbee golf on an iceberg or something. There was a bunch of antics that happened that we didn't see at all. But our role was to produce the final climactic event, which was the Red Hot Chili Peppers and the Violent Femmes were supposed to play on the deck of this Russian icebreaker for the final concert party night. Well, as it turned out, the weather was not conducive to the waves were too high or whatever, and there just wasn't possible to produce this concert on the ship. So they diverted us to an island where the ship came into, and the island was called Resolute, which is 3,000 miles due north of Ottawa, Ontario.
Wow.
Everybody refers to it at the North Pole, whether it's the real North Pole or the magnetic North Pole, I don't know, but we just called it the North Pole. And so we offloaded we put all the gear on a plane here in Milwaukee and flew it to Ottawa. Actually, maybe we trucked it to Ottawa, I don't remember, but we put it all on these gigantic pie tin things. And the gear all went into a C7 cargo transport. And then both bands and all the production people got on this C7 cargo transport plane. And we flew from Ottawa to Resolute. We landed this jet cargo plane on a gravel runway.
Oh, wow.
And then loaded all of the gear off because, like I said, the show had been diverted to a venue on Resolute Bay. Well, we took all the gear off the plane and put it into the bucket of a front end loader and trucked it across. And it was lots of trips. I mean, it wasn't just one trip. And took it across the island to a Quonset hut.
What?
Where they maintained heavy equipment like earth movers and shit. So it was a nasty, old, dirty, oily Quonset hut with a dirt floor. And we fabricated a stage on one end of this room, and we put a little PA up, and we found enough power. And we had taken along, just as a contingency plan, we took along 2 Honda 50-amp generators in case we needed some extra power. We ran the Red Hot Chili Peppers and the Violent Femmes off of 2 Honda 50 amp generators, sound and lights and band.
Jeez.
The funny part is that there were the contest winners of the ship, that came aboard, came on ground, and they all went over to this Quonset hut to party. But then because we did this on the island, all of the inhabitants of the island were invited as well. So all 120 people that lived on the island came to the concert as well. My favorite part, and believe me, I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but this was just funny. So we did the show in this Quonset hut, and part of the lighting rig, we took along a couple of hampers. We went to Goodwill and bought a couple of hampers of old, nasty, ratty-ass lamps. And all across the back line there, we put these lamps on the, on the amps, on the Mesa Boogies or whatever, and behind the drums, because we didn't really have much in the way of lighting.
Okay.
The end of the show happens, and a bunch of the people rush up to the front of the stage, and Anthony pulls out a Sharpie because he thinks everybody's going to want to autograph, and he runs down stage, and he says he's got his Sharpie out, and the people go, "Well, no, we don't want your autograph, but there's no stores here. Can we have a lamp?"
What?
Yeah.
The locals wanted the lamps.
They just wanted the lamps because there was no stores on this island. And are you taking those lamps with you? Can we have a lamp? So that's the kind of shit that is etched in your memory forever, and it's just hilarious. That was one of those special gigs that you never get to do again in your life.
Your bio says that you did sound for Def Leppard back in the day. Was that a touring thing, or was that just a couple of shows, or how did that?
Well, and yeah, I mean, it was Clearwing did the sound. I didn't. I mixed monitors for some of their shows, as I recall. But that was a tour that we did after Eddie Rabbitt. We had already built these LRCs that we talked about earlier. Ricky Medlock, who's now with Leonard Skinner again, was the lead guy in Blackfoot. They were a 4-piece full-on rock band, Highway Song and Train were their big hits. And they were going out to do a tour. We engaged with their management and booked the LRCs onto that tour, but it wasn't enough plywood on the sides of the stage for them. They wanted something bigger than just 16 S4 type boxes looked 8 aside. So we split the 8 boxes of front-end loaded stuff apart, and in the middle, we stacked up 4 JBL 4550s, 6 Community MB80 horns with 12s on the back of them, and then another 4 or 6 JBL 2445s atop of that. It was like this giant, massive wall of plywood on both sides. The odd part was it was front-loaded boxes mixed with folded. So there were probably a few acoustic anomalies going on there. At any rate, the Blackfoot tour went out, and the opening act on that tour was Def Leppard on their High and Dry tour. The Def Leppard kids came in, and they were like the 17-year-old nobodies at the time. But I mean, I'm not kidding. They brought the rock, and obviously they are where they are today. So they were the opening act, which is why I ended up mixing them. They had a front of house guy, Robert Allen, who was Richard, the drummer's brother. And I think he's gone on to, last I heard, he was maybe production manager or something for Taylor Swift. So he's gone on to big things. And obviously Def Leppard has as well. I'm still here, here with Clearwing.
Just. What was it like doing the expansion? Because Clearwing forever was a Milwaukee company, and then obviously you had relationships with, was it Sunbelt?
Yep.
In Phoenix for a while, and then you ended up going on to buy them out. Is that what happened?
Not exactly. When you're in business, especially in a business that was as seasonally controlled as ours here in the Midwest, we started out at the beginning of the company doing just rock bars, and we had no summer business. And then we started doing little church festivals and whatnot, and our business model flopped, being a completely summer business. We were just trying to find a sweet spot where we had some good revenue stream all year round. Well, when I was touring or when I was on vacation, I used to just go into a town and open up the yellow pages and look at who was there doing what we did. I came across this company in Phoenix at the time called Sunbelt Scenic Studios, and they were a lighting-only company at the time, and I was a sound-only company in Milwaukee at the time. Because we had inverse busy seasons, there wasn't a lot of business for them in the summer because it's the polar opposite of here. It's so flippin' hot down there that, all of their stuff happens in the fall to spring. So we fabricated a thing I called the NAFTA of production at the time, where we traded equipment. They would send us lighting and a stage all summer when they weren't using it, and we would send them sound in the winter when we weren't using it. We generated revenue off each other's investments until we didn't, the agreement was that we're going to do this until we don't need each other anymore. Well, 12 years down the road, Sunbelt had some problems and went through a well, let's call it a divergence between the partners, and they ended up closing their doors, and it left a void in the Phoenix market that we knew pretty well. And Jamieson was with me at the time this was all going down. One of the people in the Phoenix market that had been another former Clearwing employee tried to start up an offshoot of Sunbelt called Genesis Audio Systems down there, and he wasn't doing so well. So we actually went at an acquisition of Genesis, not of Sunbelt. He ended up failing as well. So we just ended up finding some people down there, and Jamieson went down to Phoenix to open up the Phoenix office. We knew the market. We knew a lot of the people. We weren't stepping on any of our friends' toes because they had all closed up and pulled out. Coincidentally, at about this same time, we ended up getting a guy at Mask Sound based in New Jersey, was a father-owned transition to his son's kind of company, and the sons decided to pull all their attributes back to New Jersey and close their Phoenix and Orlando offices about this same time. So there were 2 production companies, maybe 3, that went out of the Phoenix market, and it left a void there that we could fill. Again, we weren't pissing anybody off to do it. So Jamieson went down there and opened the Phoenix office for us with Dave Temby, who's now our COO down there. We just started out, and traction upon traction upon traction. It's been all good ever since. Jamieson was instrumental in that for sure, because I stayed here most of the time and he went down and got that off the ground. My hero.
It was a couple months. It was a great time of year. It was kind of just, the weather was really nice.
That's the upside of Phoenix.
Jamieson, you've gone on to do a bunch of other gigs, but not band gigs, so to speak. You do a lot of logistics, and what did you call yourself?
Freelance technical director.
A freelance technical director. So
smoke jumper.
You're right. What exactly do you do here, Jamieson? Because you're involved in a lot of trade shows and a lot of events, and you have this car charging system, which I want to ask you about. But what does someone bring Jamieson Filip in to do these days?
You know, it's funny. I just had this discussion last week with my brother. He said, "What do you do, Jamieson?" It was kind of weird because it's a little hard to explain to people who don't work in this business that it's harder without a basis of at least starting somewhere. A lot of it's corporate work now, a lot of corporate events, and it usually circles around a corporate incentive trip or like a corporate meeting or something along those lines. But usually I'm working with agency or a producer or someone that's putting that event together for a big company like, let's say, IBM or Google or something like that. We listen to the client, see what the heck they're trying to do, and come up with, some parameters for
He doesn't
that.
do anything, Greg, does he? He's just making stuff up right now.
Yeah.
I'm making it all up. I'm making every bit of it up, yeah. So the way I explained it to someone was, one slice of it is kind of like vendor management, right? Get all the quotes, hire the vendor, manage the vendor. A slice of it is straight up production management, scheduling, logistics, all that kind of thing. Another slice of it is technical management, so making sure that all the departments are talking to each other, especially if they're not from the same company, drafting, all that kind of thing, and then going on site and making sure that what we planned happens.
Man, that makes a concert seem like child's play.
I just want to say, too, that Jamieson worked for Clearwing for quite a few years. He came to us when I acquired a company from Western Wisconsin called Creative Sound and Light. So Jamieson was with them before he came to Clearwing, and he obviously climbed the corporate ladder at Clearwing very quickly. He's always been very organized, very good about everything he does. So when he went on to do some things for himself, he had attributes that crossed over just being a sound guy. He had broader perspectives, and he's certainly gotten involved in a lot of really interesting projects, and I can't say enough about his skill sets and how he interacts with people. So I can see why he's gone on to be a rock star of his own, so to speak. Some of the projects that he does now are much more diverse, as you say, than just doing a concert. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot more to it. And you've done some things in the Caribbean and such lately, right, Jamieson, that involve transporting containers and all of that other stuff and scheduling all of that.
Yeah. There was a couple last year. 2 years ago, and then the year prior, we did a big corporate show. One of them was in Cabo, and the other one was in Dominican Republic on the beach.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were at Punta Cana around the same time I was. I remember you talking about building a road.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy. We convinced the hotel early on to take down a 12-inch thick, 10-foot high, 20-foot wide concrete wall so we could load in. So that was a big accomplishment. And then we didn't think they'd agree to it, but it was kind of the only way for us to get in and out.
For you, it's not build the wall, it's tear down the wall.
Right.
So you've come in there, the first thing you have them tear down this cement structure. That's like a Tony Luna move. Yeah, you're going to have to move this wall.
Yeah, well, it all fit in the budget. It's fine.
Isn't it funny, though, because sometimes what it takes to get the gig done is that acute. I mean, we're down at the Superbowl right now doing some of their stuff, and what I've seen those people cut down trees, and replant them, but cut them down for the gig and then put a new tree in there later. And so taking down a wall or building a wall or any of that stuff, people don't understand what happens to really make an event go sometimes. It's pretty astounding.
For 4 years, I was working for the general contractor for the NFL. Kind of in the last couple, I was in a project management capacity for them. And, the stuff you have to do for that is just gonzo. John, I don't know if I've ever explained it to you, but this is totally outside of sound and lighting. I never touched a piece of truss was as close as I got to touching sound and lighting gear on that. But it was everything temporary from the perimeter to the center of the field, anything that was temporary, except for like the entries, we touched. Tents, trailers, jersey barrier. A good example is in Minneapolis, which was the last one that I did. We also took care of cable paths, like establishing cable paths for all the broadcasters to get in and out of the stadium. There just wasn't enough room to get down into the docks. We cored a 12-inch hole through the concrete and put a cabinet in there so that they could take cables in and out of the stadium.
What's a core drill, 12-inch diameter core drill for, let's just say, 10 feet? What's it take to get that done? Holy smokes.
They did it in half a day, the coring company. It was a whole deal.
Speaking of big events in cold places, what was it like doing the stuff up in Vancouver for the Olympics?
For me, it was pretty cushy because we had such a big team that I spent a lot of my time in the office. So but the team of guys that were there were pretty big, especially the ones that were working in it's Cypress, which was the south-facing mountain that was in Vancouver. If you don't remember that Olympics, it was a warm year, and that is facing the valley of Vancouver. So snow melted over and over again. It was rainy, and it was pretty terrible. They had to fly snow in from other mountains.
Imported snow?
Yeah, because it was so warm. Now, granted, I didn't have anything to do with that, but the guys had to rebuild. We had field of play tents, and they used snow anchors for them. And the snow was melting underneath the tents. They had to rebuild the tents daily that were up on the field of play. It was interesting. I worked for the tent company. It was clear span tents. I mean, the smallest one was like 10 by 10, and the biggest one was like 3 football fields long and wide. It was a pretty interesting thing, and there was a lot of politics involved in it. We met daily with the Vancouver Olympic Committee, and there were a couple things that happened at that were really kind of challenging. And one of them was the Olympic Committee. They hire folks that manage their sites. It would give us orders on where to build things and what timing. They were the project manager for that site. One of them had placed a couple tents basically underneath high tension lines. When the guys were up on the tents, like doing work, they get little zaps and they couldn't figure out why. And then someone looked up and said, "Hey, there's high tension lines right there." WorkSafe BC came and shut the whole site down.
Is that like OSHA?
WorkSafe, it's their version of OSHA.
Was it like Van de Graaff generator, like coming off the wires across the atmosphere to the people on the tents?
Totally, because it was like
wow,
200,000 volt lines up there. It's ridiculous,
Oh, jeez. Oh man. Okay.
Because we were doing lights in the tents, we had to have an electrical engineer sign off on everything, submit all the stuff, and then sign off as installed. It was this whole permitting thing.
Oh, the inspectors. Yeah.
The engineer has to inspect it as installed and sign off on it and submit it to the authorities. So it's kind of deep, honestly. He gets another engineer that specializes in grounding to come in with a solution. BC Hydro, who's the electric company up there, says, "No, this isn't going to work. We got this PhD guy that's going to look at it." And it turns into this whole process. And it turns out that the high tension lines, they couldn't just shut off because they are the only power that powers Vancouver Island out in the bay. It took 6 weeks and meetings and all this crazy stuff. At the end of the day, we had to do this stuff where everything had to be grounded. There had to be a lineman there. There had to be an engineer at the other end, because even if you hit the lines, it won't shut off. And We had to clear the ground and drag a chain behind the forklift. It was just this whole thing that was just like, what the hell have I gotten into?
And you know what? That's the kind of stuff that the public doesn't ever have a grip on and technically shouldn't.
Right.
That's our job to get those things done so they enjoy the end product. But sometimes the path and isn't it funny that somehow it always gets done in the allocated time, but it takes every minute you have. You're at it right up to the end.
Right down to the last second.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah, the other good story from up there is we had a contractual obligation to ground all these structures, to physically ground them. It was on us. It wasn't on the electrician as we had thought it was. So we went through this whole thing. The engineer came up with this really, anyone that looked at it would be like, what are you talking about? Like this manufactured tab that had to go under 2 big bolts, and then it had a big cam lock that came off of it. It had to go into the ground system. And then there were 2 big things that came out of it. One of them was it was a bunch of money, right?
Of course. What makes the world go round?
Yeah. But the bigger one was the Vancouver electrical inspector, the head electrical inspector, insisted that the tents cannot have a ground rod driven. They have to be on the same electrical plane as the rest of the system, which meant that all these tents that have been up for 2 months have to shut down completely to plug the ground in. And some of them are press tents that are operational already. Every tent had to be done this way, including the 10x10s that have a single light hanging in it that has one Edison cable coming off of it to plug into the wall.
Oh, jeez. That's the bureaucratic nonsense that really bogs down any show right there. Yep.
Oh, yeah. And there is no way to plug this cam lock into the Edison, you know? It's like...
You can make an adapter. There's adapters.
I've seen some of the funniest adapters online.
Yeah.
Cam lock to 1/8 inch.
So long story short, what happens is this becomes an issue and gets escalated through VANOC. All of a sudden, like a week after this gets escalated, or a few days after that, the head electrical inspector for Vancouver is opting for early retirement.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he's gone. Sometimes political pressure gets it done.
What happened, Jamieson, the first time that you drove a tractor trailer out of town?
That was a little harrowing because...
Probably wasn't any worse than mine.
No, it wasn't, actually. It was way better than yours because I only ran over like a traffic horse or something like that going around a corner. But the thing about it was you were in the truck and Tom Martinez were in the truck. And it was like my first time driving out of town across the country kind of thing. You know, I think we were going to Iowa. That's what it was. Nothing like putting the most important people in a truck with me. Hopefully I don't turn this thing over. I didn't run over anything like Greg did on this.
What happened to you, Greg?
So my shop at the time was in this little neighborhood in west side of Milwaukee. I had just gotten my CDL. I don't know. I had been driving maybe for a couple of weeks. You know, this is when Clearwing was growing to the point where we couldn't fit in straight trucks anymore. So I go pick up a tractor trailer to load a gig, and I've got an empty trailer on my truck, and I take this turn to go to the shop. I just kind of feel something like hanging up. It's just kind of a snag on my truck. And I look in the passenger side mirror, and I had the whole rear tandem axle up on the trunk of a car.
What?
The biggest thing about tractor trailer is the off tracking of the trailer, right? When you take a turn, the trailer doesn't follow the tractor exactly. It's a whole different arc.
Right.
So I look in the rearview mirror, and my trailer is up on the trunk of this car. I thought, oh, Jesus, what am I going to do now? Well, the front end of the car was up off the ground because all of the weight of the trailer was on the back of the car. And this was like July or something. It was the middle of summer. So I figured, well, I got to get it off, you know. So I geared down and I drove a little bit forward until that whole tandem axle came off the rear of the car. And when it came off the trunk of the car, the whole front of the car slammed down to the pavement, and all of the windows exploded out of it. All of the windows were up. And this lady comes running out of the house. Oh, my God, my car. What did you do? We're supposed to go on vacation tomorrow.
Oh, no.
And I said, well, you know, you're going to be going in a nice new rental car now because I'm insured, but I can't do anything about that. So, yeah, Jamieson was much better driver than I was at first. Shit happens. That's why they make that hat, right? That says shit happens on it. I got to tell you, over the years, Jamieson and I have had more laughs than most people have in a lifetime in this industry. We have had so much fun doing what we do. And even though it's a ball buster of a job and there's always the next problem to solve, it's a fun thing to be involved in. And who's the guy that said baseball been very, very good to me? Well, the production life has been very, very good to both of us. Jamieson has ended up doing some really awesome things, and Clearwing is doing well. And you just got to keep at it, do the next right thing, and your career will grow.
It's a very interesting business. It attracts a lot of interesting personalities. Dan O'Brien told me one time, and I'll never forget this, it takes a certain kind of person to be in this industry, to do this job. It's not for everybody.
John, I refer to it as a chromosomal abnormality. There's just something in your DNA that says this is what you want to do.
It's also those unique people that make the industry what it is, or at least my memory of it. It's somewhat diluted now, I would say. There's a lot of schools teaching what we do. Back when I first started, when I was a little kid, first getting into this, there wasn't a school to go to learn this job. You had to find somebody, you had to apprentice with them, you had to learn your...
Oh, it's the school of hard knocks, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a little different now.
Yeah.
Like you said, it was more of a kind of a touring family atmosphere back then.
Well, Kevin Zucker, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, he just did a Facebook post the other day about what he had to do to get to where he is in the industry, wherever that is, and just his observation that some of the kids nowadays are looking for the shorter, faster path. And I don't begrudge anyone what they're trying to do with their life, but I can concur with his perspective. We've had lots of kids come in from the Conservatory of Music in Phoenix, or the Full Sail in Florida, or there's Chillicothe, Ohio, a number of places. I've had some of them literally say to me, I got my degree now, how long before I'm mixing the Rolling Stones kind of thing.
Right.
It's not how it works. You got to pay your dues. I don't care if you go to work for Clair Brothers, the biggest company in the world. You spend 6 weeks in the cabinet shop before you go to 6 weeks in the cable aisle, before you go to 6 weeks polishing cabinets, before there's a ladder that you climb to get anywhere. And The only thing that really works and allows someone to earn something respectable in this business is hard work. It's just that simple.
There is a lot of trial by fire that goes on. I mean, back in the day when I was trying to get on a tour, I got my first tour, there was just an ethic that you didn't screw up. And if you did, there was a conversation about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the saying? You're only as good as your last gig, right?
Right. And nowadays I see people making terrible mistakes daily on shows. It's just part of the way it is with having a younger generation that doesn't seem to care as much. And, I heard that you guys were doing some more training and schooling of your employees. Is that an ongoing thing there? Because it's really needed in this industry to teach people the right way.
Yeah, we do a lot with employees, but we do a lot of public outreach as well. I mean, we have the AVL Expo in each of our offices where we have all kinds of manufacturers bring product in, kind of a mini LDI, if you will, or a mini Infocom. We do one in Denver, one in Phoenix, one in Milwaukee. And then we have a couple of other training elements as well, too, where high school kids come in and learn about RF frequency coordination or whatever. I think we have to do something to continue to replant the forest, if you will.
Yeah, I agree.
A fire burns down the forest, or we cut down trees, we got to replant, or we don't have anybody else to support us. And unless you want to be 80 years old loading the truck yourself, you got to have somebody that knows what they're doing that's younger than you. So, John, was Bodine's one of your first things?
My first real tour, I guess, was Bodine's, and it was funny because I was coming off of a Clearwing gig with Hogleg.
Okay.
I was on a Clearwing gig with Jeff, and I think it was the Lieutenant Dan band.
Oh, yeah, okay. Gary Sinise, yeah.
Yeah, we did 3 dates, and then I got a call on our last date from Barbara Newman, and it was basically getting the gig. And I flew right from there to the Marcus Amphitheater. That was my first real tour, but I had done some, baby bands before that. There was the Guffs and some other things. But
as a Milwaukee band, the Bodines were just huge at Summerfest for a few years in a row there. And you get an opportunity to start somewhere doing something with somebody, and you go out there and perform. I mean, I remember doing a gig this is probably before your time, but they used to do shows out at Marty Zifko's ballroom in Hartford.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Zivko's.
It started out as a roller skating rink. It's a round building, and now they do just wedding receptions there and shit. But back in the day, we did Ted Nugent, Meatloaf, all kinds of people there. And I remember one night, and Warren Martiniak, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, he works in our shop. Well, we still chuckle about this one because there was one night when we did Iron Maiden out there.
At Zivko's?
Yeah. And they had a bad night with somebody on their crew, and they left this kid behind. I mean, the bus took off with all of his backpack and his driver's license and everything on the bus, and they left him behind in Hartford, Wisconsin. Bug Tussle, USA. They were mad at him or something. So you got to perform. You get left behind in Hartford, Wisconsin.
It's for real. That's right. And it could have been something as little as a guitar malfunction or something during the show.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Or, the drummer dropped a stick and you weren't there to hand him another one. Whatever it was. Yeah.
I think I started doing Bodines in the late 90s, early 2000s. But before that, I had done as a house guy at every club in the city. I had worked for Badger Sound. Truly, the work at that company was the best experience I could have gotten because I was literally on my own at each gig. And if there's a problem, I had to fix it. I learned so much by doing those gigs.
And you know what? You're hitting on a really solid point because we say all the time at Clearwing, I'd take nothing away from somebody who has spent a bunch of tuition money to go to Full Sail or Chillicothe or wherever. More power to them. I would rather hire somebody who has spent the last 3 years doing a bar in bowling alleys. They know how to get into a box and tap into it.
Right.
No matter where it is, they know how to do just about anything necessary to pull a gig off. And when you start at a school where you walk into the same medium every day, there's no variables. And what gives you your good gig experience is dealing with the variables.
Right. And more often than not, you have to deal with them with, like you said, 1 or 2 minutes remaining before the show starts.
Oh, my God, on the fly. Have I ever told you my Plasmatics story?
No, I got to hear this.
Yeah, have you got time?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is at the Palms, and this story is labeled the worst day in Gregg Brunclik's life. And I won't tell you all of the story because there was a lot of decadence around my life right at that point in time. But I'll tell you the show part of the story. Okay. This was Wendy O'Williams and the Plasmatics. And of course, this was January 18th. And I don't remember what it was. You can Google it and find it. Because this was the night that Wendy O'Williams was arrested by the Milwaukee Police Department in Milwaukee.
Oh, you did that show?
I was mixing monitors for Wendy. For that show.
Oh.
Yes. I have every detail for you right now, right here, John.
Let's do it.
Wendy, first of all, let's see, how should I put this? I don't use the C word on many people, but Wendy had it coming. She was a nasty human being. So we did sound check in the afternoon, and it was, I need more monitor, I need more monitor, I need more monitor. And everybody in the whole building is all, well, I'll just say it, everyone was whiffed. Okay, so it was back in that period of time where the drugs were pretty prevalent in the rock scene. And this was the punk era too.
Sure.
So anyway, she comes in and it's more monitor, more monitor, more monitor. I said, okay, is everything going to be as it is right now? Meaning she's going to come out the way she is. So we EQ the monitors for maximum volume, blah, blah, blah. The show starts and Wendy walks out and she's wearing nothing but a pair of white cotton panties and some strategically placed 1-inch strips of black electrical tape.
Right.
She's wearing a black patent leather policeman's hat.
Oh.
Now, I say that because
I know what's going on.
Do you know what the brim of a hat does to monitors? Right?
Yep.
Well, I got to back up just a second because the show starts and it's supposed to be Wendy. There's a video there's a sheet dropped in front of the stage, and there's a video of Wendy in a police chase. She's dressed in a full cop uniform, which is why she has the black patent leather hat on. She's dressed in a police uniform, and she's running from the cops. And there's this whole video, and what's supposed to happen is the sheet drops down from the ceiling, and there's a TV, at the time a CRT TV, on a ladder downstage, that Wendy swings a sledgehammer into the face of the TV and the glass explodes all over the audience.
Oh, God.
Okay, well, That was supposed to be the start of the show, okay? And then it was supposed to go uphill from there. Okay, so the video starts, and Wendy's roadie comes running around. Where's the ladder? Where's the ladder? They had a white, small A-frame ladder. It was painted white. It was their gear. It was exactly the right height to put the CRT TV on, so that when Wendy swung the sledgehammer, it hit the TV. Well, guess what? The ladder had been put under the stage, and the lighting guy had run his feeder cable through the ladder and into the disconnect. Okay, now back in these days, the disconnect was like 1.5 inch wide bus bar, right? You open up the box, and there's 3 fuses and a bus bar, and you'd put on these gigantic alligator clips onto the bus bar.
Okay.
It was all fine to do when the box was off.
Right.
The video is already playing. The show is going. We said, can we put it on a road case? No, I have to have the effing ladder. It has to be the ladder. we get the clamps off the disconnect. We get the ladder out. He takes the ladder up. Now, keep in mind, power is up. The box is hot. It's open, but it's hot. So they take the ladder up to the stage. They get everything ready. And the video is only like 5 minutes long. So we're dealing with all of this in 5 minutes, right? So the lighting guy looks at me and he says, you're stronger than I am. Can you put these clamps back on the bar? I said, oh no, you're the moron that ran your feeder. So he goes to put the clamps back on the bars. He hits 2 bus bars at the same time.
Oh, no.
Boom, the whole building goes down.
Right.
900 screaming, drunk punk rockers in the dark start tearing the place apart.
Man.
Crazy. Okay, so we run to the other end of the building. We replace the main fuses. We get the show back up. Wendy does the show, and Wendy is a complete piece of work the whole time, spitting and she's got this patent leather hat on, so of course now the monitors are feeding back, so I was pumping so much high frequency into them, yada yada yada. And the show is just complete decadence. Wendy comes out on stage half naked. They're breaking shit all over the place, and again, oddly enough, the back line had not this time lamps but potted plants all over the back line. The end of the show comes. Wendy comes out on stage with a shotgun, and it's loaded with blanks, but it's a shotgun nevertheless. So the end of the show is supposed to be she points the shotgun at the ceiling, lays off a blank round, and the downstage lighting truss crashes to the stage.
Oh,
and that's the climax of the show. But before she does that, she emulates fellatio on the shotgun. And then lays the shotgun round off the ceiling. The truss crashes to the floor. The guitar players run their guitars through the amplifiers. The guitar player on my side of the stage, because I'm mixing monitors, was a 6'6" white guy with a black mohawk wearing a complete French maid's costume, complete with garter belt and fishnet nylons, and a guitar tattooed on the side of his head. The bass player on the other side of the stage was a little short black guy with a white mohawk wearing nothing but a diaper with a giant diaper pin on it. And Wendy, of course, is half naked, wearing cotton panties and black electrical tape. And so the guitar players run their guitars through the amps, kick over all the amps. The drummer walks through the drum kit. There's broken glass and dirt from the potted plants and flowers and shit all over the stage, right?
Oh.
So Wendy goes off stage, and we figure the show's almost done. I mean, how could they do an encore? There's nothing left of the stage, right? Well, when Wendy went off stage, the Milwaukee police arrested her backstage, and she resisted. So you remember this picture of Wendy with her head in a frozen mud puddle and a tactical cop's boot on the side of her face. It was on the front of the Milwaukee Journal the next day. Well, so then the guitar player with the French maid's costume runs back on stage. He grabs the mic, and I think, how are they going to do an encore? And so we unmute the mics, and he says, the cops are beating the shit out of Wendy out back.
Whoa.
And the audience goes freaking ballistic. There's bottles flying and chairs on fire. And I mean, the riot squad had to come and clean the place out. So
did the gear survive?
My gear did, because it was above the stage on the wings. Yeah, they couldn't get at it. But that was chaos, man. Complete chaos that night. Epic.
At the Palms, was that the same place where the famed meatloaf encounter happened?
When he walked off stage?
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened once at the Palms, and it happened once at Marty Zifko's ballroom, too. Yeah, when he got like halfway through the set and said, screw it, I'm done, and left.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you address him as Mr. Loaf or just meat?
I don't know. I didn't talk to him at all. I just left it alone. But, another funny one is we did the Police at the Palms, and they pulled up late in a van with a trailer behind the van, and I helped this guy carry an Ampeg SVT up to the stage. I got to mix the Police that night, which is one of my all-time favorite nights ever.
Yeah, very cool.
It was Walking on the Moon, SOS, Message in a Bottle, all the hit. They were so good. But I helped this guy carry his Ampeg SVT up to the stage, and later on he comes out and plays, and it's Sting. So I helped him carry. He was schlepping his own gear at the time. That's kind of fun.
Our friend Tony Travato said that he once went down to help you with a load-in, and it was Metallica in a van.
Yep, at the Palms. Yep, at the Palms. Tony, boy, did we go back. I met Tony when he was like maybe just turned 15 years old. His band, Tripper, was in a battle of the bands at the Palms. They used to have those things all the time, and he was there with Tripper. Was he a character? Oh, my God.
I mentioned that I was interviewing you on the show, and his comment, it was a short pause. He went, well, I think it might be a long show.
Did he ever tell you I pantsed him at Alpine Valley?
Oh, is he the guy that you're referring to on the bio?
He was standing, I don't remember what show it was, some sold-out show at Alpine Valley. Might have been like Deep Purple or a sold-out show at Alpine Valley. And Tony, he walked downstage right, and he was standing next to the PA system, which at the time was like the size of the Empire State Building. It might have been Judas Priest or somebody. It was Gunji Mixon, I remember that. And he was standing on the lip of the stage with his hands on his hips, kind of evaluating his kingdom.
As he does.
And I came up behind him, took his shorts right down to his ankles. Boom! In front of 40,000 people. And he just turned around and looked at me and he went, really?
I can totally see that.
Pulled his pants up and walked off, yeah. So that's funny.
Whoa, well, guys, it's been a real pleasure having you guys on the show and talking about all this stuff. And we might have to do this again because it was really fun. If people want to check out anything going on with Clearwing, there is a website, clearwing.com.
Yep.
Is there information on there about the training that you guys do, or if people want to get involved?
All things Clearwing live there, yes. All the offices, all the community outreach stuff. We have gear for sale there. We have solicitations for new help there. So if people are looking for a job or want to get into the business, obviously you got to start at the bottom and work your way up, but we're always taking on new folks. So, yeah, that's all on the web.
Jamieson, we'll definitely have to do this again because we never got to your electric car charging station, which I want to find out about. But if people want to get a hold of you, do you have a website?
Nope. Word of mouth, buddy. Tell them to contact you.
I'm just going to I'll put in a plug right here. Jamieson's the best. We were together all the years we worked at Clearwing, and we're still the best of friends. And if somebody's looking for a guy to take point on their project, I couldn't recommend anyone more than him. So, we would like to use him more. We just can't afford him. But we would like to, I'm kidding. We would like to use him more on Clearwing projects, but usually by the time we talk to him, he's busy. So, he's really good at what he does. Jamieson Filip, the man, the legend.
Jamieson, Gregg, thanks for coming on the show. We definitely should do this again.
Absolutely.
Yep.
This has been Soft Pass. Take part in the conversation on Facebook. Search Soft Pass Podcast. Soft Pass thanks Blue Microphones. Visit them at bluedesigns.com. Theme music by the Sam Yanis Band. Join us again next episode for more behind-the-scenes stories and experiences of working professionals in the music industry.